we can look at her as the grandmother of abstraction. She beats out Wassily Kandinsky by about 6 or 7 years, and I'll show that a little bit later. But there's also something that's going on in her work that isn't happening in the works of people like Kandinsky, Mondrian, Picasso, the people who are kind of roughly her contemporaries. But anyway, before I get into that, before I ruin the surprise, let's crack on and have a little look at some of her early work. Looks quite different, doesn't it? And if you remember last session, if you came along to the last Feminist Guide to Botany where I talked about Georgia O'Keeffe, this might seem a little bit familiar. Georgia O'Keeffe also started out with what looked like pretty run-of-the-mill, if very, very beautiful works. And some of these works are in oil, so the one at the top is just a landscape in her home country of Sweden, and then you have a very beautiful bird. Wasn't she gorgeous as well, by the way, in her beautiful puffed sleeves? I've sort of got puff sleeves on, but not quite the same. And she was born, she was the fourth child of a fairly wealthy family. Now that's really quite common in terms of the history of female artists. There's a class divide there that we're still struggling to get out of. But she was born in 1862 from this very distinguished kind of lineage of cartographers and naval heroes and people like that. And she spent summers at this beautiful family home that they had on the island of Adelso. Sorry, apologies if there are any native Swedish speakers. I'm going to butcher a whole lot of words this evening. So she came into contact with nature a lot at a very early age. And she seems to have had quite a liberal family because they not only allowed her, but encouraged her to study
whoever's fucking doing that is driving me mad.
Fostered her talents. And I mean, in the 1870s, 1880s, that still wasn't that common for women to pursue art in a serious way. Lots of women pursued art as a kind of a convenient or acceptable hobby for young ladies of a certain stature, basically just to fill their time. But Hilma was encouraged to study properly, and obviously she was very, very good. This could be a very early Cézanne. It's a beautiful painting. There's a real understanding of what's happening with the light here. The colours are already this kind of wishy-washy pastel. It's a lovely use of impasto. Personally, I really like the composition. So she very self-evidently is a talented painter in a traditionalist way. She is taught, she studies at a variety of different colleges before eventually ending up at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts at the age of 20. Now, again, there aren't that many other women who were studying at the Academy of Arts at the time, so, she probably would have had some difficult times. She might not have been taken as seriously as her male colleagues. She would have experienced all the kind of gender bias that was rife in the 1880s. That kind of stuff would have been run of the mill. She was, again, quite clearly inspired by the Impressionist painters. She's doing a lot of plein air painting. And she also was obsessed with botany. So the skill it takes to make something like this, which is a kind of Impressionist style work, and the skill it takes to make something like this, which is perhaps more of a traditional scientific way of looking at botany, they're very different skills. So, at a very early age, early 20s, she's showing a very wide array of painterly and kind of draftsman womanly skills. And she goes through her training in quite a conventional way. I'm not going to spend too long talking about that at this time because we're on a schedule, everybody. And once she graduates from the Academy of Fine Arts, she essentially establishes herself as a really quite well-respected landscape and portrait painter. I actually haven't included one of the portraits here, but there are some really beautiful portraits that she makes. She's equally talented as a portrait painter as she is as a botanist. And she really, to start with, had what we might call quite a conventional practice. So I suppose the question is, and aren't these beautiful as well? They're so detailed. I don't have the patience for works like that, but I just always have such admiration for people who do and can do it well. But how do you go from something like this in just a few short years to something like that? Here she is in her studio looking like a bit of a baller. I love seeing pictures of people at work, and I think this is the one that's as close as we get with Hilma, really. And it's a really interesting answer to that question, because this is the point where Hilma's life, up until this point, it's been fairly conventional, fairly wealthy, upper middle class upbringing. She's gone to art school. As I say, she's obviously encountered some gender bias, just because that would have been what happened at that time. Women in any field experience gender bias. But this is where things get a little bit weird and a little bit more interesting, because really, what I suppose the driving force behind a lot of Hilma's work, or if not all of Hilma's work, for more or less the rest of her life, came from experiences that she had with friends that she met, female friends that she met at the Academy of Fine Arts. And it was a group of women, they called themselves Der Femme, or the Five, and they were very, very interested in theosophy, spiritual ideas, kind of what was at the time kind of fringe science, but was also accepted by a lot of different people. I'm sure you've seen the kind of Victorian vogue for seances. People went wild for this. And Hilma was one of them, but she seems to have done it in a really, really interesting way. And I mean, if you kind of extrapolate and look at the kind of wider vogue for spiritualism or spirituality, or searching for spirituality in the kind of late Victorian era, there's something really interesting going on there. And I mean, if you think about that, as I say, kind of in terms of like a wider timeline context, this, we've come out of the Industrial Revolution. It has been, it's not been the nicest 100 years in a way. There's been lots going on at this time. Scientific advances are starting to explode. I mean, you have cameras being invented, film being invented. Georges Méliès is making his first films. You have X-rays being discovered. You have, the birth of quantum mechanics. Einstein is starting to make some of his earliest discoveries in these kinds of years, at the turn of the century. The scientific world is bubbling, and it's sort of about to explode. And there are so many questions that still haven't been answered by science. There's so many issues that can no longer quite be laid to rest. Our collective kind of faith in the West is starting to dwindle, and people are looking to different places. It's an increasingly globalized world as well. You have the invention of the telephone. All these things are happening. It's this kind of crazy boiling point. And this vogue for spirituality and the occult really comes into that in quite a big way. So, you extrapolate what you want from that. But to my mind, there are people, and artists especially, who are struggling perhaps to find meaning in this increasingly industrialized world. And spirituality seems like alternative modes of being, different kinds of spirituality seems like a very sensible way of trying to make sense of a world that increasingly doesn't make sense, if you ask me. She's by no means the only artist who does this. Many of the artists I've already mentioned, Kandinsky, etc., they also turn to spiritual practices like theosophy in order to try and find different kinds of meaning. But coming back to what I was saying about the Five, and this is the room where they did their meetings. There were 5 women who Hilma had met at college, and they had these really beautiful. I'm like, I wish me and my mates did this. This sounds great. They would meet once a week, and they would hold seances. And they would open each meeting with a prayer from a different religion, followed by a meditation, a Christian sermon, and then a review and analysis of a religious text of some kind, and then they would perform a seance. And, she was very influenced by lots of different writings, by lots of different people. Rudolf Steiner was a particular one who I'll talk about later, and another woman who was very famous in the seance community called, I think, Madame Blavatsky. Again, apologies if I mispronounced that. And it was a really, really interesting time. Here's some more kind of occulty images, which were also in vogue at the time. These were kind of the original photoshops. I mean, we assume they are. Maybe they're real. Who knows? But, photography as a medium and film as a medium, people haven't figured out really at the time, how much how much scope for imagination there is. So, if you see a photograph of something, surely that is true. So there were, people were using doctored images to prove belief in ghosts, belief in alternate, not alternate universes, but spirit worlds, and it's just a kind of crazy time. It seems like it would have been quite a lot of fun to be in a séance at that time, ectoplasm and whatnot. But what's fascinating is that we don't usually associate seances with art, and that was really, in some ways, the kind of the piece of sand, the shell of the oyster of all of Hilma F. Klimt's work, this idea of being able to access the spirit world and engaging with it through artistic practice. So the five, when they performed these seances, would also draw. So these are some of the earliest abstract drawings that we have made by Hilma and her friends at these seances. So they would do the seance, and and this is a little excerpt from a Guggenheim curator called Tracy Bashkoff, and she says they would enter trance states, or perhaps using a device called a psychograph. The women documented the messages they received through automatic drawing. You should know that from Surrealism. If not, I'll come to it in a second. And automatic writing. These methods, normal in spiritualist circles of the era, required the receiver to set aside conscious thought and trust in the message being conveyed. So then the receiver, once you've kind of connected with your guide from the other side, you let your hand move freely across the piece of paper. It's like an associative practice of drawing. So you really can just draw what you feel in a lot of ways, or draw what you think you're hearing, or maybe that you are hearing, who's to say. So what's interesting about this is that, the surrealists come along 20 or 30 years later, and they claim that they have invented this, automatic drawing. It's basically, the cornerstone of surrealism. And what's fascinating about this, and what I didn't know until I researched this class, is that automatic drawing has these roots in the occult and in seances from the Victorian era. So, the surrealists did not invent this at all. This was something that was originally in what was, I don't want to say predominantly, but it was largely a female space, this kind of interest in the seance, interest in the occult. It really seemed to appeal to Victorian women at the time. Perhaps, I don't know, it was a disenfranchised sex at the time. Maybe it was a form of power. Who knows? But what I find interesting is that this whole, method of using automatic drawing as a form of connecting with spirit world was kind of adopted, perhaps appropriated, maybe bastardized in some way by the predominantly male surrealist movement. And, the words like spirituality got replaced for unconscious. So there's a kind of masculinizing, in some ways, of the language that's being used. And I just find that very, very interesting, especially when you consider that Hilma's work, and I think perhaps this is one of the reasons that many of us find her work so incredible. It seems like it's come out of thin air, out of absolutely nowhere. I'll show you in a minute the other kinds of work that was being made in 1906 when she started to make some of her earliest abstract pieces. We've never seen any works like hers before. Certainly I haven't, not at the time she was making them. Maybe there's stuff that looks similar in the 60s and 70s. But actually, the more reading I've done, the more fascinated I've been with the idea that she didn't pop magically out of a vacuum. There were other women who were making fascinating work, who were all moving in these same spiritualist theosophy kind of circles. So, and their names, sorry, I meant to put them on the screen, but I'll pop them in the chat a little bit later. So I'm going to talk about very, very briefly about 4 different women. So this image here is an image by sorry, my notes are on the wrong page, by Anna Mary Hewitt, who was born in 1851, so 10 years earlier than Hilma F. Klimt. And the colours are really interesting. There's something kind of Blake-like about them. But again, I could see this, on like a Mexican votive piece in the like 1970s. This looks really contemporary to me. This is like 1870s. This is a drawing by a very, very famous occult seance leader called Madame Fondrion, who there's very, very little information about her. And this is an image by Georgiana Houghton. And this is another image by Georgiana Houghton. And if you don't know her work, there's actually a fabulous book which is called World Receivers. Sorry, I had to check there. Which is it kind of aligns Georgia May Houghton's work with Hilma F. Klint's and a woman called Emma Kunz as well. And again, all of these women were embedded in spiritualist movements in the kind of late Victorian period. This is one by Barbara Honeywood, who is another lady who, again, very, very similar. She was actually Bethlehem Mental Hospital, or Centre for the Clinically Insane, or whatever it was called back in the day, holds a collection of her work. So this is interesting because we're getting to the crux of this now. These women's work is not accepted by the arts establishment. They never really get exhibited. None of them are ever really taken seriously as artists. Why? This work is phenomenal. All of the work, particularly I have a real love for Georgiana Houghton's work. This one's called The Eye of God. And I mean, probably one of the most powerful works pre-1900 that I've ever seen. It is savage. It's got so much movement in it. If you showed me this and said this was Louise Bourgeois, you could sell it to me for millions of pounds. I would 100% want to own this piece. And I'm just curious as to what you guys think. So why do you think these women have not been kind of, I suppose, brought into the annals of art history? Because to me, there's a very, very simple answer to that question. The occult was taboo. That's very true. Sexism, they're women, they're seen as hysterical. I mean, yep, suppressed, men are afraid. There's something, the church, that's another interesting one. Hysterical, they're working outside the male dominant art scene. Yeah, probably the time their focus was getting shown, getting known. Exactly. So all of you are basically saying exactly what I'm thinking. So firstly, the sheer fact of gender. They're women. They're not accepted into the kind of art historical canon. They've also got this kind of doubly weird thing of, they're not rational, scientific, surrealism, for all that it's surreal, is a very rational form of abstraction or kind of in engaging with the unconscious. These are much more felt in some ways. And I think there's something really interesting about the difference between the kind of rational step-by-step approach of surrealism. It has a manifesto attached to it, for God's sakes. Like, anything that has a manifesto is maybe not that surreal in some senses. These are very, very different. They are about gesture. They're about feeling your marks on the paper. They're about, being connected to something that's spiritual, that perhaps doesn't fit into like neat community guidelines at the time. There's something very, very interesting going on in all of these works, and they remain to this day outsider artists. So I just think there's something quite interesting going on about this. But anyway, so we come to Hilma F. Klint's first full-blown series of abstract works. And these are called Primordial Chaos. And already in this first series of works that are created in 1906, just FYI, there is so much that she will carry on for the rest of her life, into all of her different work. There's this kind of symbology. There's an understanding of colour. She assigns gender to colour, which I find very interesting. For her, yellow is male and blue is female, and green is kind of unity between the two colours. There are these strange forms of symbols. There are organic shapes. There's understanding of geometry. There's, these kind of idiosyncratic notations that only she understands. And there's something wonderful about that, because she's not explaining herself. Her work doesn't come with like a handy user's guide that's like, this means that and this means that. They feel like mathematical equations that we aren't equipped to understand yet. And all of this comes from, and this is fantastic to me, she is said to receive a message from the other side, from one of her spirit guides, that tells her that she has to create a body of work for the temple. And this temple is going to be a place where people can go and contemplate the meaning of life through art. And she envisages this as a spiral space that all of her work is going to be shown in. And I'll come to why that's important later. And I just think they're absolutely stunning. These feel to me like radio waves, like lasers, like, long dead languages that we don't understand. And they defy explanation. And I mean, it's difficult in some ways for me to talk about Hilma's work because, when you have a Caravaggio, you can say, yes, well, Caravaggio was looking at this form of art that had come before him, and he's here telling he's the story, the story of the Virgin Mary and blah, blah, blah. As I say, Hilma F. Klimt doesn't have this, this easy translation. So I can say what I want about them, but really it's down to how you view them. And I just want to, again, contextualize just how radical these works are in 1906. So all the works on this screen right now, they're by some of our big name players in the early 1900s. Down here we have Giorgio de Chirico, we have Auguste Rodin, 2 by Pablo Picasso, 1 by Henri Matisse, and 1 by Kandinsky. That is what these big name players in art history were making between 1900 and 1906. This is what Hilma F. Klimt is making. So when we talk about, Hilma as the forefather or foremother of abstraction, there's some definite legs to that statement. This is what they're making, this is what she's making. And I just want to talk a little bit more about Kandinsky, who has always, up until this point, held the crown. And he actually he very vigorously defended his own crown. He wrote in letters to people in later life, the painting that I made in, 1914 or whenever I think it was, around here, around composition, whatever number it is, composition 7, about 1913. He said in letters, this is the first ever abstract painting. I am a very, very important man. You need to write me into history because I made the first abstract painting. And what I wanted to point out to you guys was this interesting move he has, this evolution that he has towards abstract expressionism. So, and you can see it quite clearly here. So you have shapes and forms, lots of people, they're all dancing around, nice. A couple of years later, the shapes are starting to become a bit simpler, they're starting to become a bit more stylized. In this one, again, you see the shapes, you see the people, but he's moved one step further. He's kind of, suggesting musical instruments and whatever, and so on and so forth, until it becomes, the kind of 1923 version is perhaps what we're most familiar with from Kandinsky. So it's a very logical, step-by-step process that gets him there. Great, good for you, Kandinsky. This is what Hilma F. Klimt's work does. It goes from 1, 2, 3. There doesn't really seem to be like an awful lot of prep in the middle. She leaps fully formed into this language that is uniquely hers. And, for me, that's nothing short of radical. She's absolutely one of the most unique artists that I've ever come across. And there's, in many ways, there's really no predecessors to her in that vein, aside from these outsider artists who, as I've already mentioned, were part of the occult movement. But I want to just show you now, I've already been talking for ages, so I'm going to be a little bit more quiet through this little section and just let you absorb some of these works. So this series is called Eros, and it's one of, again, the very, very early series. And the only thing I'll say about this is, what other works made in 1906 can you think of that have a pastel pink colour palette? And again, this understanding, and it's a totally innate understanding of colour, is totally unique to her. So this is the Eros series. And I'd love, actually, for you guys to just do a little bit of kind of word association, just whack in the chat if you feel like it. If you want to just absorb the works, please feel free. But just comment in the chat. Just let me know the first words that come to mind when you look at these works. Just curious for me. Calm, soft, feminine, womb, petals, watermelon. Judy Chicago, I'm with you there. Cosmic, flowers, seeds, flight, sea, harmony, mathematical, organic, outside of gravity, bacteria, cello, atomic, lemniscate. I don't know what that word means, so please come back and tell me what that one. I just think they're wonderful. Vulva from Libby. I'd kind of agree with you there. Yeah, definitely. Vestal, Askich. They're so beautiful. She very quickly moves on to another series. This one is called Evolution. And this one's very interesting. And these are all part of the commission that she got from the other side of paintings for the temple, by the way. This all comes under this group. And she tends to work in these different
Simon, could
kind
you
of symbolic
grab
series, as it were.
my big black cardigan
as a whole body of work,
by
but they
my
definitely do come in kind of specific
in the bedroom,
bundles, as it were. And what's interesting is that the evolution works, she's making these only 50 years after Darwin has published his theories on evolution. But actually, these probably relate, if not equally, then perhaps more, to the work of Rudolf Steiner, who becomes quite important in the story in a minute. And Steiner claims some pretty radical stuff, which I think is really quite beautiful in lots of ways. So essentially, he was a philosopher who was quite avant-garde, quite out there. He was associated with the Theosophy movement as well. And he claimed that humans evolved from a kind of spirit world, and the early human societies lived much more in a kind of dreamlike state than we do now. We were kind of fully aware of supernatural forces, spirits, and over time we evolved the capacity for logical thought, and that kind of relegated dreams to this this world that was, to do with the unconscious. They were no longer real. And what's interesting about that is that Steiner believed that, at the time that he was writing, that we were now en route to rediscover this hidden power from which we'd become alienated, both through art, through philosophy, through kind of radical new kinds of religion and spiritualism. And Hilma was very, very much involved in his work. She held him in very, very high regard. So this is her evolution series. Again, I'm just going to be quiet for a second now and just scroll through these so you can absorb them. They're very Blakey on these ones for me. And very kind of internal. They're like seed pods, but guts and intestines and hearts and lungs somehow. Things growing from each other. These ones down here also, they have an Edvard Munch kind of feeling to me. And actually this one has to be one of my all-time favourite Hilma F. Klint works. I just think it's stunning. So these are called the 10 Largest, which is a different series, and they're the biggest series of works that she ever made, and they were made as part of this temple series. And I wanted to include them here, but I'm going to come back to them. So just in case you think I'm ignoring them, I'm not. I will be coming back around to these, but I want to talk a little bit more about Rudolf Steiner at this stage, because he had a really serious effect both on the inspiration that she had from her work. She took his ideas very seriously, but also she had an interaction with him which really kind of damaged her. And I think it's quite an interesting thing, there's perhaps a reason that we shouldn't meet our heroes. So in 1908, and I think she's produced over 100 paintings for the Temple series by this point. She met Rudolf Steiner for the first time. She'd been corresponding with him. She was absolutely dazzled by his work. She was really into the idea of, bringing human consciousness back from this kind of perhaps phallocentric logical place into a more feminine space. That's just me riffing on that, but makes sense to me. So essentially, in one of the letters that she sends to him, she asks Steiner to come and visit her in Stockholm and see the 111 paintings that she's made for the paintings in the Temple series. And Steiner eventually did come and see the paintings, but the meeting didn't go in the way that Hilma wanted it to. In actual fact, he left thoroughly unimpressed by her work and stated that her way of working was totally inappropriate for a follower of theosophy. And he kind of stated that Klimt's contemporaries wouldn't be able to understand her paintings, that it would take another 50 years for anyone to decipher them. However, of all the paintings that she showed him, he did like the Primordial Chaos series, which is interesting. I mean, I think they're great, but I don't think they're any better than some of the works that I've just shown you. And Hilma was absolutely devastated by his response. So much so that she actually seems to have quit painting altogether for about 4 years after they had this encounter. Now, it may not have been solely due to him. She had some horrible stuff going on in her personal life at the time. She had to move studios. Her mother went blind, and she had to go and look after her. And they lived together for quite a long time after that. But what we do know, which I think is quite interesting, and art historians have been a little bit, they've been throwing some shade about this. Steiner kept photographs, some of which were hand coloured, of Hilma's work. And we know that later the same year, he also met Kandinsky, who had not yet at that stage come to any form of abstract painting. So some historians have assumed that perhaps Kandinsky saw some of Hilma's original abstract works and was influenced by them maybe when he was developing his own path. Now, I'm not going to throw any shade because I've already thrown enough shade at Kandinsky. And I like his work as much as the next person, but I'm just going to include that. You make up your own mind about this. And here's a little image of Hilma's studio, and just looking at them on the walls all together, it must have been mad. You go into kind of, a little Swedish farmhouse in early 1900s, and you go upstairs and you find these. Like, people must have thought she was insane. I'm surprised she wasn't committed, to be totally honest with you, because the only other place that, as we've said, you're finding these kind of works is either in the spiritual world or in insane asylums. This idea of the outsider artist, and there's a whole narrative about that I don't have time to get into now, and why that's so damaging. But eventually, in about 1913 or 14, Hilma does come back to making work, and gee whiz, does she come back with some serious clout. And she makes some of my favourite series. I think I've said that about all of them, but she makes some of my favourite series in her whole oeuvre, I suppose. And the first of these being the Tree of Knowledge series. And of course, that is a religious reference, all the things that are firing off in your brain. We have Christianity, fruit of the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve, good and evil, light and dark. But then you also have Buddha sitting under the tree. You have King Cobra under the tree protecting Buddha. You have Yggdrasil and the world tree. Perhaps Ladon and the golden apples in Greek mythology. Trees are known to be what's called an axis mundi in kind of mythologies around the world nowadays. Trees are often very, very important. They go down into the underworld, they root up into the upper world. There's something really, really beautiful and spiritual about trees. And this is what this series is based on. And what's fascinating about this series is that it's the first time you really can see this progression of something moving from perhaps, more of a logical understanding of what a world tree, like in the Norse mythology, might look like. You have these kind of roots moving up into these upper worlds. It's all connected. And then, as you move on throughout the series, it changes until it becomes something that is the same as, it comes from the same place, but it is abstracted from that place. It's no longer recognizable, but all of that thought is still in there. So we're starting to get these glimpses in the way that she's making the series into how her mind is working through these different works. And I just think they're absolutely mind-boggling. And I actually bought my mum that one. Mum, if you're listening, that one's for you. And again, this all connects with many, many different kind of esoteric ways of looking at the world. There's images that perhaps, from the 1600s and earlier, that maybe shed some light on where she's getting some of these kinds of images that I just thought it would be interesting to share there. I have a fabulous book on alchemy where there's all sorts of images like this. Highly recommend if you're interested. Another series that she makes around this time is called Swan series. And I'm aware that I'm already running out of time, so I'm going to just whiz through these last bits. And again, this really gives us this insight into how she's dealing with, again, the swan is a very big theme in theosophy. It's male, female, light, dark, good, evil. Obviously, there's ballets being written around this time. Actually, is it around this time? You have the Fibonacci sequence coming in here, understandings about geometry and mathematics and doubleness and, just how colour functions when it's next to each other. And, again, this is the kind of culmination of that series. So you really, really see this idea of how she's moving towards abstraction very clearly in these series. So here's some of them all together. I think this one is one of the first in the series. Another series that she makes a little bit later on is called Altarpiece. These are very much related to how she's looking at different world religions at the time. Again, they feel very... I don't know how you guys feel about them. They feel ancient, like their languages, their understandings about how space works in terms of, like outer space. They feel like radio waves, black holes. There's so much stuff going into these that, to me really speaks to her engagement in the sciences at the time. And there's something quite interesting that I want to bring in at this stage, which is this idea that when we look at abstraction, as I said with Kandinsky, there's something happening in Kandinsky's work that is about, taking an image that you already have, an image of people dancing, and it's going through this series of abstractions. And that perhaps happens a little bit more in the swan works, or maybe in the tree works. But in loads of Hilma's other work, she doesn't start with something that's visible. And that, to me, is a very, very interesting difference between how Hilma's work and someone like Kandinsky's work is functioning. Hilma, and this is the crux of many articles and, the documentary that's just been made about her work, which I massively recommend, by the way. It's called Beyond the Visible. I will include links to all of the texts that I have talked about in your reading list. What she's doing is not simply abstracting what she's seeing. She's looking for ways to understand the invisible parts of the world. How the spirit moves through the world, how X-rays move through the world, how do atoms work? And all of these questions are questions that were being asked by great scientific minds of the time, by Einstein, by Planck, by Marie Curie. All of these people are finding different ways of trying to explain how we exist in the world, either through science, but Hilma is doing it through art. And to me, she's one of the only people that really, truly gets to the core of what these are. And I don't know how she does it. I can't explain it. I'm not an art writer. I'm an artist, so I'm looking at this from the perspective of how she's physically achieved this. And to me, there's just something that's going on in these works that I don't see in any other works of that period or any other, and this is just me waxing lyrical about her now. But again, her work reflects cutting edge science at the time. These are Babbitt's principles of light and colour, and there's an obvious relationship between her work and how he's looking at and attempting to understand light and how light functions.
Okay, cool.
Hydrogen, how this is the time when we're starting to understand that the Earth has an atmosphere, how light waves might or might not move.
Okay, cool.
We're using lots of diagrams to explain, for example, the periodic table of
I've had a
elements.
sausage
These are
roll.
all
I've had
arbitrary
that
things that we're using to
I was
visualize
hungry,
things
so I
which
ate.
are invisible to us. Again, Theosophy is doing similar things in some of its weird and wonderful diagrams here about how the spirit might, move through the human brain or connect. Here we have, again, Marie Curie and what's his name, the guy that took the first X-ray? I can't remember, but anyway, that's just my bad science history there. And theories of how atoms worked. These images come from 1903, 04, 1911, 1913. These were our best guesses at how the building blocks that made up the universe functioned. And to this day, we have to take some great leaps of faith in terms of quantum mechanics, which weirdly I've been reading a lot about lately. Being comfortable in uncertainty is the building block of quantum mechanics. And to me, Hilma F. Klimt's work sits alongside some of those kinds of understandings of the world. And I may be getting a bit far-fetched now, but to me that makes sense. So there we go. That is my little diatribe on Hilma F. Klimt's work. Now, most of you will know, and I won't go into too much detail about this because I've just flat out run out of time. But many of you will know that Hilma's work, at the end of her life, and she carried on painting for the majority of her life, she died in her mid to late 70s. When she died, she had packed up, labelled, and basically archived herself. She had catalogued her work, arranged it meticulously, and left it all to the only person in her life that she thought might look after it, which was, I think, either her nephew or her great nephew. It's in my notes somewhere, but I've gone so far off piste with my notes that you're just going to have to roll with me on this. And lots of her work had labels with it that said this is not to be opened until 20 years after my death. So perhaps she really took Rudolf Steiner's criticisms to heart. Maybe she agreed with him. Maybe on some level she knew that she had awoken too early in the darkness whilst everyone else was still asleep. And to have that prescience and to have that confidence in your work that, it's not me, you guys just aren't ready for me yet. There's something fabulous about that. And, the renaissance that she's getting now is well deserved. But one thing I do want to say is that I can guarantee you in 25 years' time, this will be happening again. We will still be finding female artists who were not part of the accepted narratives that we tell ourselves about art history. We will still be having to rewrite how art history functions in order to update and include and give due credit to the women who we still haven't heard of yet. So that's sort of the note that I want to leave this on. So I have talked a lot in a fairly short space of time. I hope you've enjoyed the lecture part. I'm just going to open up to any burning questions you might have for me about Hilma. Claire, no, she didn't have children actually, which I think is quite interesting. And yeah, if there are any, Willem Conrad Rontgen, thank you, who took the first X-ray. Yeah, any questions you want to ask, just pop them in the chat now. Then we're going to take a short 5-minute break, and I'm going to rearrange my screens here, and then we're going to do the practical session. Quite right, Lisa. Who has time for children as an artist? Her paintings were her children. Can I recommend a book? Yes, as I say, I will recommend all the books I've been using and all the articles I've been using as well. And I'll pop them in the reading list for you and send them out after the class.
I'm just going to the toilet.
What happened to the other 4 of the 5? Did they continue to meet? In all the reading that I've done, I haven't actually been able to find anything about about what happened with them. There was one interesting snippet of an article that suggested her work may have been shown once in London, and it was perhaps one of the 5 that came with her to install the work. But that's the only other mention that I've found of them, actually. What media did she use? So these are all oil on canvas, I believe, but she used a lot of watercolor, a lot of like pencil and graphite, some charcoal, but generally speaking, I think it was watercolor and oil. Can I post the names of the other artists? Yep, I'll pop them in the chat a little bit later. That's an interesting one from Liberty. Did she think she was making abstract art or making representations of a real spirit world? Yeah, I think she probably believed that she really was making the invisible visible. And I actually think she was. I think she was achieving that. I don't think she would have ever called herself an abstract artist. The coin, that term hadn't actually been coined yet. So I don't know how she would have thought about her work, actually. That's a really interesting question. We see it through the context of everything that's come after her and, the kind of major understanding of like art history that we have in this kind of chronological setting. But it must have been very strange for her, like kind of coming into this space where nobody was really making work like that. And, what she must have thought of it, I don't know. That's a fascinating question. Yeah, I just mentioned about the other women in the group. I haven't actually been able to find an awful lot about them. They were all artists, but that's the sum total of my knowledge on them at the moment. One from Suzanne. Are any of her notebooks published? Oh, yeah, they are. So I'm just going to stop my screen share for a second so you guys can see this one. Hilma F. Klint, Notes and Methods. So this is a really, really interesting book. And I'll come to it a little bit later in the practical session as well. Ooh. This is the most awkward book sharing I've ever done. I'm sorry about this, guys. So, she created all of these like crazy notes that nobody can read. They're very kind of, idiosyncratic is the best word for them, I think. And they're all these strange kind of notations and plans for how she was going to create her drawings. But the sketchbooks themselves are also absolutely incredible. So here's a really interesting page of plans. So yeah, that one, Hilma F. Klint, Notes and Methods, that will also be in the reading list. So that is probably all we've got time for on the Q&A. So I'm going to switch my camera off and mute myself for a couple of minutes. Grab yourself a glass of wine, pour yourself a cup of tea, get your painting and drawing materials ready, and then we will crack on and do some abstract expressionist masterpieces. So I will see you in 5 minutes, everybody.
Coffee.
Okie dokie, everybody. So, thank you for bearing with me while I changed my setup. It does get a little bit complicated sometimes with all the tech, but yeah, thank you for being patient with me. So, what I thought we'd do to start off with, and if you have already been to the collaboration that I did with the wonderful Anna Suter, this will be familiar to you. We're going to start off the evening by doing a little kind of bit of meditative drawing, really, with your houseplants. So, and by the way, if you did go to the class with Anna Suter, which was fabulous, we're going to actually have her back, and we're going to be doing one on fungi this time. So that is going to be really, really fun. So we're going to be doing fungi and mindfulness, and that's probably going to be around the end of May if you fancy joining us for that. So hopefully you're all set up with something to either draw or paint with. It really doesn't matter what medium you use for this at the moment. Oh, hang on. Sorry, I thought I was muted for a second there. Just been talking into the ether, but no, I'm all good. So what I'd like you to do is grab one of your plant babies that you've got hanging around, or you could just have a leaf, or I don't know, whatever you might have picked up from the garden. You can see my very plant-filled living room behind me. And we're just going to start off, I'm just going to use like an average pen for this. And it's really simple. We're just going to spend a few minutes just touching a plant. Plants actually are supposed to respond really well to being touched, but we're going to throw a twist in there, and whilst you're touching the plant with one hand, it can be your dominant hand or your non-dominant hand, I'd like you to record the experience of touching that plant with your drawing hand. So for me, that might look a little bit like this. I'm going to close my eyes whilst I do it because I just think that you connect a little bit better that way. Let's put that down there. So I'm going to start with my pen on the piece of paper, and I'm now going to start moving my hands around. I'm really trying to feel like the texture of the bark on this little stem. It is like bark, which is quite interesting actually, because it's like a teeny tiny tree. Just moving upwards and downwards, moving out, and it's so surprising. There's, plants are amazing. There's this kind of wonderful feeling of being alive when you really kind of tap into this kind of mindful space of just going, wow, I'm a human and I exist on a planet with plants. How incredible is that? And yeah, those are the kind of thoughts that I actually get all the time. And you can just see that I'm not going to be making anything that's particularly, beautiful from from this little exercise. But that's really not the point. It's more about just engaging with the natural world. And this one is just our warm-up. We're going to be doing some more kind of Hilma inspired works a little bit later, but I have faith that Hilma would appreciate this. So I'm just gonna, now I've started you off with this, I'm gonna leave you for about 2 minutes to just work your way slowly but surely around your plant, just in silence. So your 2 minutes starts now. I'm just going to carry on doing my little drawing here. Any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I do recommend having eyes closed for this. You've got 1 minute left on this, everybody. Just 13 seconds left. And there we go. So, you know, you may have got a little bit further than me, but what I love about this as a practice is that, and I'm willing to bet that Hilma F. Klimt would have been into this too. It's not a drawing of the plant per se, it's a record, a drawn record of your interaction with the plant as a being, but also as this kind of entity that you're sharing the world with, which is just quite a strange idea. So we're going to do another couple of warm-ups, this time a little bit different. And I'm just going to share my screen with you because this time you're going to be working from the screen. And if you've never watched this, I highly recommend. Oh, wait, I'm on the wrong place. There we go. Oh, no, it doesn't want to work. Oh dear. I might just have to move quickly to the next one there. Never mind. Lucky I always have a backup. God, I'm good. Here we go. So we were going to be working from David Attenborough's Kingdom of Plants. However, we're going to just move straight forwards to the next one that I've got lined up for you all. So for this one, you're going to be working really, really quickly. So as you can see from the screen already, we're going to be working from a time lapse of a sunflower that's growing. I was going to say who's growing, which is quite nice. That's growing from seed to flower in this clip. And what I want you to do is a form of blind drawing. So very similar to what you were already doing. Just don't look at your piece of paper. If blind drawing is like a new phenomenon to you, it's really, very simple. And it's about engaging with what you're drawing. in terms of the actual object or the being in this case that you're drawing, rather than worrying too much about what you're putting on your paper. So if you just watch me a second, if you were to start, what I would do is I would probably start maybe a third of the way up your page, and as you're watching the sunflowers grow, move your hand around the piece of paper without looking at what you're drawing. Now, if you want to, you could actually use two hands for this. It's a very kind of symmetrical growth pattern, I suppose. So you could draw with two different mediums in different hands. That's totally up to you. And it's only about 2.5 minutes long. So enjoy yourselves. Blind drawing with you guys. Off you go. And I've taken the sound off on this one, just so you know.
I think you'd really enjoy this, Simon. It's amazing. This like blind drawing. She's such a good teacher. Learning loads from her.
And there we go. So I hope you enjoyed that. As I said, I would have had another time lapse for you, but alas, David Attenborough was not to be this evening. Lucky I've got other fabulous things in store for you all. So what we're going to do next is a series of what I like to call meditative drawings or paintings. You can use whatever medium you like for these, based on Hilma's work. And I think what's interesting about this, there was something that always really struck me. I don't know where I got this information from. It's one of those kind of apocryphal tales. And if you know any facts about this, anyone in the audience, please feel free to tell me. But it often comes into my mind. And it was somebody who told me once that Japanese painting, there wasn't a kind of plein air practice in Japan in the way that there was a kind of practice of painting outdoors, for like constable or whatever. Instead, Japanese artists would go and sit outside and watch a cow, for example. They wouldn't take their drawing pad and go and draw a cow. They would go and sit in a field and absorb essence of cow until they felt they really understood what it was that made a cow up. And then they would take that feeling back to the studio and draw a cow and these kind of beautiful calligraphic marks. Now that might be total rubbish, but what I find interesting about that story is this idea of not relying on your eyes. When you're drawing something and there's this like real obsession about, drawing things that look like the thing you're drawing. And it's something that we've had in the West since the Renaissance. And in some ways it's the death of creativity, and that's coming from somebody who is a technical artist. A lot of my work is very technical in terms of it does look like what it's supposed to look like. But for me, there's often like a real that insistence on that form of drawing can really scare people off, and that form of making art. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of Hilma's most beautiful works, which is the 10 largest, which is the biggest series of works that she ever made, and we're going to absorb essence of them and then do some stuff. But I'm going to tell you about them first. So here they are in all their glory. These are the 10 largest, and they're some of my favourite works of hers. Specifically, I mean, my favourites are these two here. Actually those three, to be honest with you, the bottom middle three. And these were meant to represent the full life cycle of what it is to be human. And I just think that's incredible. And so these two here are childhood. And these kind of blue, soft, feminine tones, they're kind of womb-like, lots of seedy, womby, circular kind of flowers. Then we have youth here. And I find it interesting, there's all these things that are pulling in different directions, like, spirals that are moving out of themselves. Like, there's a more explosive energy, perhaps, in some of these ones. And then these four with the kind of pinky purple background are called adulthood. And then finally, these two are old age. And yeah, I just think they're some of the most beautiful works that she's ever made. And there are so many aspects of perhaps what you might call like organic or botanical influence that are coming from them. But anyway, what I would like you guys to do, I'm going to show you all 4 images from this series. And you're only going to have, I think 2 minutes is what I've allotted for this to kind of interact with them. So it's up to you. So this will be the first one. And that 2 minutes that I'm going to give you, I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to divide it into 2 sections for you. So for the first minute, you have a choice. Either you can just sit and absorb the image, or you can write down your word associations like I asked you to do in the chat earlier. Just pop them down on your page. And, for me, there's like ovary, connectedness, Venn diagram, spiral, belly, all of these words. And you can search for those words. Sometimes language finds ways to say things that, not that artwork doesn't, but that go alongside artwork in a really interesting way. And once you've absorbed this or written about this for a minute, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and draw what you feel that painting is of. So you might just find that you're making abstract forms on the page. You might be making lots of circles. You might be trying to draw your memory of the painting. There's nothing that's wrong about the way that you want to do this. There is like fully no judgment about anything that anyone makes or any way that you want to approach these exercises that I'm going to give you this evening. So it is quite different from the other Feminist Guide to Botanies. But that's my instruction to you. Absorb for a minute, draw for a minute with your eyes closed. And I think that closing the eyes is a really good way, which I keep going on about, is a really good way of getting out of our own heads. So when you're ready, your first minute starts now. Any questions, pop them in the chat. Yes, Farah, you definitely can draw it with words. All right, so we're going to switch over now, and I'd like you to close your eyes and draw whatever shapes, feelings, emotions, memories come to mind in relation to the piece that you've just absorbed. Off you go. All right, and that is time on your first one. Now, for me, I think it would be really nice to have all of these kind of overlapping on the same page, but that's totally up to you. So this will be our second piece that we're going to look at for a minute and then draw with our eyes closed for another minute. So when you're ready, off you go. Again, any questions, pop them in the chat.
Did you get what you need?
Yeah. It wasn't in, but Mariana helped me.
Oh, great.
Looked around his toolboxes until I found what I needed.
Oh, good.
All right, and that is time onto your drawing. All right, that's time on that one. So we're going to move on to our third. One of my absolute favourites. 1 minute to look and potentially write, absorb. Off you go. And move on to your drawing. 1 minute. And that's time. Moving on to your final work. 1 minute. Off you go. And that's your absorption minute up. Onto your drawing for the last minute of these ones. All right, and that is the end of that section. And I'm really curious because I haven't run this exercise before online, or this kind of exercise. How did you find that? Was that really uncomfortable? Did interesting things come up for you? Comment in the chat. I'd really love to know, because that one's quite a new one, especially with these kinds of works, which are just so evocative. There's like a real mindfulness feeling about her work for me. Oh, cool. You're all finding it relaxing. That's what we like to hear. That sounds wonderful. Connected to the unknown. Wonderful. Yeah, I think this is also, we're so used to just going to galleries and kind of, we see things that we don't really see. You don't kind of sit and absorb, which I think is really, really nice. Nice to switch that up. However, the next thing we're going to do is a little bit different. So whatever you've got to kind of cover large areas of your paper, now is the time to get it out. So I've got my trusty little watercolour set, which is not a particularly fancy watercolour set, but we're going to be doing something that's kind of, I suppose what I really was trying to get at with this exercise was that it's not always easy to work from your imagination or to just jump straight to, I suppose, the invisible. That's not something that all of us have the faculties to do, myself included. So I have friends who I studied with at the Royal Drawing School who could just magic images out of thin air, and I'd be gobsmacked by this as a talent, because it's not something that I share. I am very much kind of an observation kind of gal when it comes to drawing. So these next exercises, we're going to do a few exercises which are designed to be a kind of interim step that will help you to create abstract work whilst giving you like a helping hand on the way there. So whether you've got pastel or paint or whatever you've got with you, maybe you have oil pastel, what you need now is something that will allow you to cover your paper quickly. So what we're going to do, and I'm just going to show you, I'm going to show you a series of images of things from the natural world. And what I'd like you to do is use these as inspiration. You're not only going to have a short amount of time again. It's going to be a little longer, like 4 minutes. But the idea is that you use the shapes that are on the screen to create a background for your work. So for me, I'm looking at these beautiful kind of swirly shapes in this kind of wonderful purple. I'm not hanging about. I'm just going to go in there with it. I'm not going to doubt myself. Oh, maybe is this right? Is that right? I'm just going to start making shapes on my page which are inspired by whatever's on the screen. Now, if you're particularly in love with your plants and you've got them right beside you, you can absolutely 100% use them as inspiration for this as well. I will be more than happy about that. So I'm literally just covering my page at the moment in whatever I feel like. So I want a little bit more red down there. I want maybe some blue patches. And you don't have to plan anything. Frankly, we don't have time to plan anything. I'm going to make some little... I'm going to be quite minimal about it in some ways. Just sort of what I'm up to. I will put myself on screen a little bit bigger in a minute. But obviously you need to be able to see what I'm looking at as well. And yeah, again, this is all just a part of this process of trusting yourself to make images that you enjoy making. So at this point, what I'd like you to try and do is to not get too caught up in lines. All we're doing is creating a backdrop for the work. We're creating the kind of base layer of colour, which we're going to work over with our kind of linear. For example, I've got a pen, or I've got oil pastels that I can work into this with, or I can just paint more watercolours over the top. If you were in a Feminist Guide to Botany 1, you can, 100% you can use some of the kind of bleeding techniques that we spoke about. It's really up to you, kind of how you want to proceed with this. I'm not going to give you too many preconceptions, but my only challenge is to cover more or less, it doesn't have to be all of it, but cover the whole page, and you're going to have 4 minutes to do this, and we're going to do this a couple of times, so don't worry if you feel like you're thrown in at the deep end. Don't use enormous amounts of water, because we do want it to dry enough. It doesn't have to dry all the way, but we want it to dry enough so that we can work over it. So I'm just going to pause my screen share for a second. So very, very simple. I'm not making too much of a kind of fuss over what I'm making on the page. I'm trusting to the fact that, my body, my hand knows what I want to do right now, and it's giving you this kind of jumping off point from that we can use this to build on top of as we go throughout the rest of the exercise. So does that make sense to everybody, or is anybody really, really confused and wondering what on earth I'm doing? We're all good? I think we're all good. Okay, well, any questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to pop the screen share back. So this is your first image, and as it's already been up, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Cover your page, ladies and gentlemen. Off you go. I'm just going to carry on doing my little doodle over here. And I know if you've been in classes with me before, I know I do wazz on about doodles a lot, but there's something very, very powerful about the nature of a doodle. You know, as the surrealists would say, kind of letting the unconscious fly free. Maybe they wouldn't have used that phrase, but letting the unconscious go. And then, perhaps Hilma used this kind of thing, in her seances. Who knows? Just kind of making images from the things that she saw around her, the things that she read about, the parts of the natural world that she loved. And I'm going to be quiet now because my hamster has just started gnawing the bars of her cage, and that's going to drill through everybody's ears. So I'm going to mute myself, and you have 2.5 minutes left. All right, that's time on your first one. So I know that was really quick. You'll have a little longer on the second one, which is going to look a little bit like this. So they're all quite different. I've taken all these images, as you can probably tell, from the natural world. They're either seeds or, there's a whole bunch of things, which I think is really interesting. So just remember that you can either take the colours from what you're looking at, or you can take them from Hilma's work. And your 4 minutes starts now. Ooh. Just 1.5 minutes left, everybody. This one's suggesting something very symmetrical to me, which is quite interesting. And it's, I don't know about you guys, but for me it's just so relaxing and satisfying to use colour in an instinctive way. I so rarely get to free myself up like this, you know, and this is my job, like, as a professional artist, you know. Admittedly, I'm a lecturer as well, but, you know, it's my job and I still don't get to experiment that much. It just goes to show how sort of far we're mired in some ways in this specific way of looking and thinking. So if you've drawn with me before, you might have noticed that this idea of letting go is a bit of a theme for me. Just a few seconds left. There we go, so you can see what I've made, if you can see me on the little screen. And next, I'm just going to do this one, which is shells. So that is sand under a microscope, which I just think is amazing, just FYI. So they're all quite different images, so I know I may have thrown you for a bit of a loop here, but sorry, not sorry. So whatever these suggest to you, you might draw something that's completely different to what's actually on the screen. It really doesn't matter. And you might be feeling the Hilma colours, and you might just be making up your own. All is fair. And all is fair game as well right now. And don't forget to take lots of pictures of your work, by the way. I want to see them all at the end of the class. I'll create a little Instagram gallery. Minute and a half left. Time flies when you're having fun. Just got 30 seconds left, everybody. And that is time. So, you might have something that looks a little bit like this. I'm sure yours will be much more accomplished. But I really like these. I think they're really fun, and I think certainly, you get into your groove, don't you? Or I hope you're all getting into your grooves out there in your own little worlds. So these are what I've come up with. Obviously, they're not as kind of finished as some of Hilma's like final works, but they do look a lot like some of her kind of more notation styles of working. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you a series of imagery that perhaps relies a little bit more on line. So we have some works by Ernest Haeckel. I have diagrams of black holes. I have the human nervous system, all sorts of different things in there. And I just want you're going to have 4 minutes, and you can either, what you might want to do if you're using, oh my God, words are escaping me right now. If you're using watercolors, you might want to get a thin brush and start, making little doodles over the top. You could even use, like, this brush is really split because all my good brushes are at college. You can even use that. That's quite fun. Just engage with the shapes that you've already got on your page. And you can go off piste as well. You don't have to look at the images that are on the screen, which I'm going to show in a second. You can also start looking at, your plants, yourself, your imagination, and you're just going to have 4 minutes to carry on and build up the structure of the painting. You can use any medium you like. So I might start going, actually, there's, I've got my oil pastels here. I might want to work into that. This is just time to experiment and to have fun, and you can change the textures of things. That's making things look a little bit more solid and rounded. Anything goes right now. These are some of my favourite oil pastels. They're absolutely brilliant. But before I get too deep into that, and I've just got oil pastel under my nail, which will never come out now, never mind. I'm just going to share my screen with you again. I hope you're all ready for this. Let me just double check which ones I've got. Yeah. I'm going to say let's start with this guy. Off we go. 4 minutes. When you are ready, off you go, everybody. So we've got the Earth's electromagnetic field. We have an orchid that looks like a bird. We have nautilus shells and a sea coral. So make of this what you will, my friends. Dorina says, finally a chance to use all the pinks and purples. Well, there we go. And if nothing comes to mind straight away, don't be afraid. We've been through this already. Don't be afraid to just sit and observe for a minute. That is 100% acceptable. Might even be recommended. You can change the lines that you've already got on your page. You can interact with them. One thing I would suggest is to remember that Hilma leaves quite a lot of space in some ways on her page, which is always quite powerful. The other thing that's nice about emulating someone's work is that you realise that a lot more goes into it than you ever thought it did. It's much more difficult than you'd think it is to create works like she made. Or maybe you thought it was really difficult to start with. Who knows? It doesn't mean we shouldn't have fun doing it. Got 2.5 minutes left, guys. And don't forget that these, actually, I'm going to give you guys a little bit longer on these. Don't forget that these drawings, you can just carry these on. You can find your own imagery after the class and just carry on what we've been up to. There's no reason whatsoever why the end of the class should be the end of the journey for these little paintings that we're making. And there's also something really important, I think, about stepping into spaces that feel uncomfortable. You know, I'm already sitting here thinking, oh my God, I'm not doing this wrong. Oh God. Because we're not taught to be comfortable with uncertainty, with playfulness as adults. And yeah, I know I do wax lyrical about this sort of thing all the time, but it's so good for you. There's so much research nowadays. It's like, oh yeah, we've forgotten how to play. We've forgotten how to be mindful. We've forgotten how to enjoy living and existing in the world. That I think there's a lot more to it than meets the eye to this kind of practice. A lot more benefit than we might at first have thought. Another minute.
Okay, Google, lights on.
All right, a couple of seconds left. And that is time. So you might be able to see what I've got down here. Again, not my opus magnus, but it's just so enjoyable to make them that, this is, I suppose, what I'm trying to communicate all the time, that it doesn't have to be the most incredible thing you've ever made, as long as you enjoyed making it and you were present in the moment that you made it and you can remember that moment. So number 1 down. I hope you're all having as much fun as I am. Let's go back to the screen share. Number 2. Lots more greens and pinks this time. Lots of little funny, funky looking sea creatures. A very, very weird orchid, which I'm
This is
still
amazing,
not 100%
this
sure
class. The best
what
class
it is
I've ever
exactly.
done.
And
10 quid.
4 minutes.
10
Off you
bloody
go.
quid.
Great.
Oh, I'm going to do more of hers. You only have to donate.
Yeah.
Plus, it's nice getting the recording because I can just screen share. I can screen record.
This is the moment where I'm like, I wish I had more pink in my crayon
You've done
box,
what?
as it were.
Oh, have you? Oh, oh God. Is it rectifiable?
It is, yeah. But
Oh, God.
it's a challenge.
Oh, dear.
And I didn't drill it far enough.
Right.
And then I put all the fixings in, and then the screw didn't go in far enough.
Shit.
So I had to then relocate the whole thing.
Oh, are you putting it up now?
I'm trying.
Amazing. Incredible. Well, I just thought you were planning it.
Doing that shit. This as well. Hungry.
I was
Is
starving.
there 2 left? Is there 1 left?
Yeah.
Sarah.
No, I'm not going to bother her because
No.
she'll be. If it's not good news, then it's.
No.
But I will send her this recording. I've decided.
I'd be very careful about uploading it to YouTube though.
It's always unlisted. I've done all of the lectures I've attended recently. Yeah. I would never do it public. It's not. You know,
Not cool, is it?
no.
Noticing that Hilma uses lots of these kind of dark outlines, something I'm starting to bring in now. Got 2.5 minutes left. If you're anything like me, you might just be getting into your stride now. Just 30 seconds left. That is nearly time, guys. And stop right there. So this is how my second one turned out. Getting jiggy with the spirals over here, just having a great time. And finally, on to number 3. So we have a human brain mapping the... I'm not really sure what that is. It's computer generated something of the human brain. There's some sciencey physics diagrams, a passion flower, and a cave bear skull. So by this point, you might want to just go totally off piste and just do your own doodling. That's also totally fine by me. But 4 minutes, off you trot.
Huh? Hello. Oh, you're soaking wet. Gross little cat. Oh, Frank, you can't stand on there, cat, because you're soaking wet and it's paint. Go and sit there. Frank. Stop, Frank. Oh, bloody
30 seconds left on this one, guys.
Go away. You completely ruined it.
All right, I reckon that wraps this series of exercises up. So, how do yours all look? I'm so curious to know. Please do take photos of them. Send them to us at London Drawing Group on Instagram. I'll give like a full detail of how you might want to go about that later. But yeah, these are just my little additions to my weird class gallery that I've got going here. I think this one's probably the most successful. I was channeling more Hilma in that one, perhaps. These were.
I need your help.
That one just looks like a giant clitoris, actually. Oh dear. So yeah, I'd love to know how yours all went. And the last exercise that we're going to do is optional because we've already run over time a little bit. But I think it's worth. I'll introduce it. You guys can stick around if you want to. If you don't want to, then fine. And the first thing I'd like you to do is draw 6 boxes on your piece of paper. If you have to run off, that's absolutely fine. But yeah, you can always do this one on the recording. So I'm doing some really messy boxes because I'm a messy kind of painter. If you're really neat, you can do them neater. But what I'd like you to do, for the last exercise, we're going to come back to our plant. And you might decide that you want to just use pen and paper just pen or charcoal or whatever for this one. Again, I'm going to leave it up to you on the materials here. But in the first box, I would like you to draw your plant. So I am going to draw just this like thistle thing that I've got. Just a super rough drawing. And we're going to be exploring how Hilma kind of uses her notebooks and the kind of evolution of her works in this one. So this roughly is what this thistle looks like. And I'm doing this even quicker than you will, to give you a feeling of this. So when we look at Hilma's notebooks, what's interesting, and we looked at this a little bit earlier, is we see this incredible growth of how the paintings evolve. Let me find a good example for you. Oh God, aren't they glorious? Let's find some later ones, actually. They tend to do it more there. And she works in these really interesting series that we were looking at for the whole session, really. We've been trying to kind of understand how these work. So, here's an interesting one. So she starts off with this kind of planet, and then she moves in these ones to planets on their axis, and then the planet shrinks and is surrounded by something, and then it's surrounded by a seed pod, then a little piece is added here. Then if you come back over to these ones, you have these spirals that come in. So I don't think that they're in the book in any particular order. But really that's what I'm going to ask you to do. So again, these swans are a really beautiful example. The spirals, how these move. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to go through a series of processes. And it might be better, I think I'm probably just going to use pen for this one. It might be better to just use pen as a really quick, or pencil as a really quick way of notating. So I'm looking at this and thinking, okay, how can I abstract this? Do I change the direction? Maybe I could put another one across there. They become these kind of very tulipy type shapes. maybe that becomes kind of a series of marks that look a little bit like this, that have darker colour at the top. Maybe a series of stuff like that. We're just going to get a little bit lyrical now. So say this is my second step towards abstraction. And my third step towards abstraction, well, what might that be? Well, actually, I really like how on my thistle these things kind of separate. And they become a little bit more organic and a little bit less predictable. And I might separate that altogether. And with each one of these, I'm kind of deciding which marks are relevant. Like I'm not as big of a fan about this. I like the spirals. And then this one here actually might become more like maybe I need some more forms there. Maybe I just use one spiral. You get the picture. So really what I'm going to be asking you guys to do in the next, I'm going to give you 10 minutes for this actually, because you guys can do a more detailed version of this than I have, is to just start off with your plant as your base. And it can just be one aspect of your plant. It could be one leaf. It could be two leaves. It could be the whole plant. The choice is up to you. But just go through this mental process in a step-by-step fashion that's like, okay, this is what's reality, this is what's in front of me, and where can I push that? And where can I push that to the next level? And what part of what I've just done is relevant? What part do I like? How does it need to change? Because actually there are bits that I like. I like the fact that this bit is darker here. I like this bulbous end of this shape. I liked that the spirals got a little bit more kind of double-ended. That's interesting. I didn't mean for them to happen. I like this bit. So then, and I like these circles here that are coming in kind of quite arbitrarily. So this one might then become, if I, spend a little bit more time over it. Might become something like that. Still not sure about that mark. And I think it needs something to pin it down in the background. 1, 2. Now I see I really like that one. But I think what it's missing is some connecting lines or something that makes it, I don't know, it's missing something. Let's explore, let's find out. And it's also just a great way of like getting used to the images that you want to work with. Oh, that became even more like that this time, which is nice. So you'll see me go on like a super sped up version of this journey. That might be a better mark. And I actually think it needs something sort of maybe like this. So maybe I'm just going to think about light and dark here for a second. Like the ends of these being dark. So you guys obviously can start on yours if you haven't already. I hope you have. So you might just continue on this strange journey of colouring things in. At the moment I'm just trying to figure out like what should be light and what should be dark, but you could always extend this. You know, there's no reason why you can't, you know, do a full colour version of this, and then it's an abstracted piece which has come directly from your houseplant, which I think is quite lovely. So this is sort of where I've ended up, just to give you guys another good look at that. And I'm just going to leave you for the last 5 minutes. 5 minutes, guys. And if there are any final questions, feel free to just pop them in the chat now. Yeah, anything you'd like to say to me or anything like that. And yeah, don't forget to book for my meeting with Christina Chan next week. That should be really fun. The reading list will come, wing its way to you in the next couple of days. Yeah, and I hope you've all enjoyed yourselves. Please do. Actually, do you know what? My hand's just falling off of things. I'm just going to put in the chat. There we go. All panelists and attendees. So this is our Instagram handle. I would love for you to send all of your work to us. So what you can do is you can do an Instagram post and tag us at London Drawing Group, just at London Drawing Group. And yeah, then I will pop them onto our Instagram story. You can see everybody's work. That should be really fun. They'll be up there for another 24 hours after I've posted them. And yes, I will just pop those artists' names in there if I can remember them off the top of my head. No, I can't remember them off the top of my head, and my other laptop has died on me, so I'll just have to pop them in the reading list for you. I'm afraid my brain is scrambled now. Oh, you're so welcome, everybody who's saying lovely things. Oh, good luck, Catherine, teaching at 7:30. I hope you have a good class. Courtney, that you're quite right. That thistle it's been on a whole journey, hasn't it? Oh yeah, because I've painted it 3 times now. That's really interesting. It's a really nice structure. Catherine, never apologise for drawing a giant clitoris. You know what? I won't. It's a protea, not a thistle. Thank you, Anne. It doesn't even look like a thistle, does it? I don't know why I keep calling it a thistle. Is there going to be any part 3? This is part 3, Farah. Could I show my last exercise again? Absolutely. Part 4? Yeah, why not? Why not? I'm sure I can find... oh yeah, no, I probably will do part 3 again, for sure. As soon as I get everything online, it'll probably be around September time. But yeah, I'm sure I can find plenty of artists to do a part 4 with. Any suggestions? Any artists you particularly want me to do? Any botanical Maybe a more contemporary botanical artist? No worries, Anne. You can always rely on me to go over. Oh, Sonia Delaunay. What a nice shout. Yeah, oh yeah, Christina could do one. That would be great. Remedios Varo, good shout. I will take all of these into consideration. Yeah, I talk about Leonora Carrington a lot on my Surrealist Women one, but she would be a great one to do a practical session on. I've got Judy Chicago. She's in the pipeline somewhere. Louise Bourgeois. I want to do a class on soft sculpture as well. You know, actually, so I nearly got sued by the Frida Kahlo Foundation for doing a class on her. So I won't be doing any more on Frida Kahlo, alas, because they were mean and evil, and they don't want people to enjoy her work if they're not paying for it. Yeah, that was a whole thing actually. That was crazy. Crazy times, crazy world we live in. One thing I've noticed about these, is that it's so easy to overdo them. She's so good at leaving this empty space and kind of constructing things in a way that makes you really want to engage with it. Whereas I'm finding that I'm kind of filling my space with lots and lots of different things. But that's interesting in itself. Gemma Anderson. Okay, I'm still taking requests. And if the Artist Talk series, if enough of you lovely people come to the Artist Talk series and it's successful, boy, have I got some corkers lined up for you all. It's gonna be next level. But that depends if the program gets off the ground. So hopefully we'll all come and see Christina Chan speak, and everybody will be really happy to do this kind of next stage of the London Drawing Group growth program. Don't know what I'm talking about anymore. Amazing. All right, guys, that is your 5 minutes up. So I am just going to have to love you and leave you now, my friends. Yeah, you can see my very strong trouser look here. Yeah, Caroline, there will be a recording of the Christina Chan. So as a rule, all of our classes are recorded in the same way that this one will be, this one has been, and are sent out for 3 days. So yeah, if there's ever any doubt about that, all of the classes, except for some of the life drawing classes where we use a model, is a little bit different because it depends on, we have to be aware of the model's safety and such. But yeah, so I hope you've all had an enjoyable evening. It's been amazing for me to share my kind of major artist crush of Hilma F. Klimt with you all, and I'm going to go order a pizza and relax now because it's been a long old day here, and I hope this has brightened your day, and I hope to continue seeing you all as we hopefully all slowly lift out of lockdown wherever you are in the world. So thanks very much, everybody. Don't forget to tag us in your images on Instagram. You can send them to us as well, but tag us and then we can pop them on our story feed. And yeah, thank you so much to everybody for coming, for booking, for supporting us. And yeah, hopefully see you soon. See you at a feminist lecture near Zoom. God, the jokes are getting bad now. I should just sign out. But thanks, everybody. See you all soon.